So there are a few common issues that are prevalent in student accommodation and that students just simply don't like. So those kind of issues can lead to various problems during the tenancy and ongoing once the students have left. So there's a bunch of ways and things that can be done to avoid that. Having happy tenants means more referrals, happier students, less costs and less in the property, and so forth. So here's number one. So a common complaint that students have in student accommodation, so the purpose-built halls, is staff. Now some staff aren't as responsive as they could be to any queries that students have, and that's very frustrating for students. It could be maintenance related, it could be rent related, it could be any other query related to their student accommodation. But being slow to come back to students on those queries, and also not being forthcoming with any information you have about what's going on in the block, dealing with any disputes in the building, any issues with noise. If you're not very helpful, the students are going to take a really dim view on that. I'm not going to be happy. So I think staff definitely have a responsibility in these schemes to offer great customer service where they can, try and be really friendly with students, and you know, it's their home, treat them with respect, and just treat them how you'd like to be treated, basically. I mean, it's pretty basic. Students aren't any different from your normal human. People like to be liked, people like to be spoken to in a nice way, and so that's how it needs to be dealt with. I think sometimes students can feel like they're not respected, or they're being spoken down to, or even they're not taken seriously enough because they're young. So I think there's a duty there to ensure and reassure residents and students that, you know, they're appreciated. Number two, fire alarms. So in student accommodation, it's very common for alarms to be going off sometimes, especially in the beginning when they first move in at the start of the term, on pretty much a daily basis. So students forgetting their fish fingers in the oven, burning their chips, whatever it is, sets the alarm off. So maybe tampering with the alarms if they're smoking in the rooms, and so forth. But for those students that don't cause the issue, it's a big nuisance, because once the alarm goes off, you're to exit your room and go down to the fire safety point in the building outside. So that could be at 3 AM in the morning, 1 PM in the day. It doesn't matter. If the alarm goes off, you're supposed to exit and go down to the safety area and not go back until you get the all clear. Because it's so prevalent in student accommodation, they're going off so often because of various things that are happening, and it may be a crazy night or it may be a genuine error, and it's quite a nuisance for other students to have to do that and have to leave their room so often. And at some point, and it happens in every student accommodation, if it's not being dealt with properly, a lot of students become desensitized, and so that alarm going off 6 months in doesn't mean anything to a lot of students, which obviously creates a safety concern. So students will then need to be obviously briefed initially and throughout that they do need to respond to these alarms, and that they are serious, and that they do need to meet at the fire safety point, wherever that is in the building, in the courtyard or outside of the building, which is essential. Therefore, a quick response time is needed to deal with any alarms going off, and the protocol surrounding that needs to be clear to students, that what the response times are expected to be and what they can expect from you or us as a provider of student accommodation. And in the end, students will be happy where they live. Do they need to be trained, or is there a reminder that they need of maybe food that they've left in the oven, a reminder not to smoke in the building? Are there dedicated smoking areas where students can go outside and smoke without getting wet? Is there a shelter smoking area? There's various things that could be done or can be done to alleviate issues that you get associated with the fire alarms going off. So that's a big complaint for students. Number three, noise. Noise can be a big issue in student accommodation. So noise can come from poor acoustic insulation between the units or the bedrooms, or noise in the courtyard from noisy students partying or making noise as they enter the building. It's something that needs to be addressed. For those students that aren't noisy and they like to get their head down at the end of the night and not party, or they haven't partied that night, they want nice peace and quiet. Everybody wants to be able to relax when they get home. And for some students in some schemes, they're not able to do that, especially if you're facing the courtyard in a student development, because the courtyards tend to be very noisy and the sound reverberates. So you know, I mean, even when I was a student, a lot of students, when it wasn't me, faced speakers towards the courtyard and played loud music throughout it, so the sound reverberated, going off all the time, shouting, screaming, you know, through their windows, really noisy. So it can be, you know, a huge nuisance for those facing the courtyard. On the outside, depends what you're near. If you're near a noisy road or anywhere else, that could be a huge nuisance for those students that are trying to get rest. So it's really about how is the student accommodation built and what protocol or procedures are there in place to combat the noise issues that students may be getting from their fellow residents, and also just noise transference between units. So it may not even be a student necessarily being noisy, but if there isn't sufficient acoustic insulation between the clusters, the units, or the rooms, then you're going to have very unhappy students, whether that's impact noise or, you know, noise transferred, you know, airborne noise. It can pose a big issue. So something that can be done is a noise curfew. So this noise curfew can be put in place for students. So after a certain time, maybe during the working week, they're not allowed to have parties or make noise, and maybe then allow this during the weekends, because you know, you want students to enjoy themselves. Another way to combat this is ensuring adequate soundproofing in the building between the rooms or the units. So this can be done, something that can be done sort of like a retrofit. But obviously, if you're building accommodation, it's obviously ideal to take that into account beforehand, so you have a better student experience. And again, the other associated benefits come with that, you know, students staying longer, not having to incur the cost or the time in trying to re-let that property. 4, deposit refunds. Another big issue or complaint that students can have is the time it takes for their deposits to be refunded once they've left their accommodation. So some may be waiting days, some may be waiting weeks or even months for their deposit refund, which for a lot of students is very frustrating. Some are short on cash anyway, so they want their cash back. These deposits can be £100 right up to, you know, £1,000 or so. So it's not an insignificant amount of money that they want back. They may need it to pay for another accommodation or just their expenses. Either way, they want their money. So providers have an obligation and a duty to, 1, make the deposit refund process very clear on how and when students get their deposit back, so expectations are managed. And in addition to that, you need to be quick. You can't delay a student's deposit for months on end or weeks on end. It doesn't bode well. The resultant feedback is going to be very poor, maybe even lead to negative reviews online, as with all of the issues that I'm outlining here. Again, looking after your tenants, and the same thing again, if you do this again, it can lead to referrals and happy students and a much better managed scheme. Any deposit deductions need to be clear and beforehand. An inspection should be done beforehand of the property to advise students of what's posing or what could be an issue. Alternatively, providers could stop taking deposits. So that's something I've written about before, and that's most certainly something I'm going to be putting in another Antuition, so have a look out for that. So we stopped taking deposits from our students in our student accommodation, and we had some very interesting results. 5, maintenance. So having a team that's taken too long to respond to or react to maintenance issues, again, is another big turn off for students. If a student has, say, a dripping tap or a small leak somewhere in their bathroom to a provider, that may not necessarily be a big issue. Let's say they're having a shower and the water goes onto the bathroom floor. That may not be a large issue for the provider itself in terms of urgent maintenance, but to a student that's a big issue. It's a nuisance if they reported it. It's obviously something they're not happy or they're uncomfortable with, so it needs to be addressed quickly. And if it's not, again, it can lead to complaints and other issues. So maintenance is a really key issue in accommodation, as it is with the property industry in general. Landlords, property owners, managers, operators do need to respond quickly to these sort of things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have great reviews if you respond quickly, but if you don't respond quickly, you're most certainly going to get negative feedback and the resultant consequences of that, which are negative. So a clear procedure for reporting maintenance is required. Some providers have apps where students can log on and report their issues, some email only, some call up. Often a lot of providers like ourselves have full-time maintenance staff who then are there, they're multi-skilled, and they can go out and pretty much tackle most of the issues that arise. So having those sort of things in place, pretty much the basic. Doesn't mean you're going to do great, but it means that you're not going to get the negative side that comes from it. Think of it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the basic needs of maintenance and having somewhere comfortable and nice and habitable to stay is what's required. 6. Inadequate laundry facilities. So think of your typical teenager or your stereotypical teenager that has huge amounts of piles of washing that they keep right to the very end, and then they run out and they're down to their last underwear and then decide, damn, I've worn these around a few times, it's probably time to do some washing. So you go downstairs to the laundry facilities in your student accommodation, you see that the wash machines are in use, damn, so you go back to your room, come back down an hour later, still in use, wash machines in use, dryers are in use, you return again a couple hours, and it's the same thing. And that's what the problem for many students are in student accommodation, simply not having adequate laundry facilities. Very frustrating having to queue and wait for the wash machines to come through. If there's 300 students in a building and you've only got 3 washing machines, then very frustrating. I'd say I've found that having 1 wash machine for every 30 to 40 students is a good bet. Some people disagree with that, but it means that you're more likely to have happier tenants and them able to then use those facilities. Students shouldn't be waiting long for the opportunity to wash or dry their clothes, especially as it's an ancillary income, so the provider is making income from that in any case, and those facilities are provided by an external company usually that provides washers and wash machines and dryers and then maintain those. So again, it's about working with those third-party companies and pushing them to provide more facilities for your tenants to ensure that they're happy. So the solution is very simple: supply more washing machine and dryers, and that company that's servicing them, if they're worth their weight in gold, then they'll do a great job and the students won't have issues in that respect. So that was another Antuition. If there's anything that you think I should be talking about, please comment below, like and subscribe. Definitely interested in hearing from anyone out there that's interested in investing in student accommodation, whether that's in housing or the larger developments, other sort of things I'm working on at the moment. Happy to have that discussion. So like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.